I'm going to be talking to you about lightweight JavaScript. Who here is a developer? Ah, yeah. Any JavaScript developers? Ah, a few. Cool. Okay, awesome. For some of you, this might seem obvious. For me, not that much. My name is Cristiano. I'm a hacker. That's where you can find me. That's where you can tweet me. Tweet me all your questions. I'd be happy to answer them. Oh, sorry, that went wrong. There we go. Let me stick to this thing. This is my third time at DevTalks. I'm really happy to be here again. Last time, I'm a Ruby developer, but I used to work at PayPal Braintree. Now I kind of work on my own stuff instead. What that realistically means is that my office used to look something like that, but now it looks more something like that. That's not actually my office, because I don't dare to take a picture of my actual office, because it looks a bit horrible. What I want to talk to you today about is using JavaScript to kind of put little widgets into other people's websites. We're all familiar with it. Like any of you, if you have ever used WordPress or anything else, you might be familiar with Discuss. I'm not sure what's going on with the quality there. Oh, it looks fine on that side. Discuss for using comments on WordPress, where you just write a few lines of JavaScript like this, and you end up with a comment form like this, like that on your website. So my clicker is acting up a bit. Now, that's some horrible JavaScript. That's not very pretty. I used to work for Braintree. We used to allow you to just integrate a credit card form into any website. Look really pretty, and the JavaScript for that looks a lot nicer as well. It's just like, hey, you include the JavaScript library, you say, hey, here's a div, and then you say bind this element and bind it to that div, to that container. Now that is really cool, and I wanted to do something similar. I had this crazy idea of like building something like this, but for kind of gathering information, whether or not it's tickets or people's kind of user details, etc. I just wanted to build something. I called it Punch. It's still in development. Don't try to use it. And I wanted to do something similar. So it's include punch.js, define a div, and then say punch setup and tie it to that registration ID. Now, what I really want to talk about is the elephant in the room. And when I say the elephant in the room, I mean the game elephant in the room. And if you go like, okay, what the hell is he talking about? Does anybody know what this chart means? This is the average website size between 2010 and 2013. And between 2010 and 13, it's doubled in size. Today, the current average website on the internet is the same size as the original Doom. 2.3 megabytes. 2.3 megabytes to show you some text and some images. That's insane. Now, 2.3 megabytes, you're like, okay, we all have fast internet, but it's really hard when you're on a mobile website, when you're on a mobile phone, and you need to download all of that data, or at a conference. And to give you a bit of an idea of how these libraries kind of impact that, Discuss is about 308 KB, Braintree is about 201, Punch is about 50. And the JavaScript library is actually about less than 20K. So what I want to show you today is how I achieve that, and give you some ideas of how you could use that in your day-to-day life to do something, maybe something similar. So the problem really is that I'm not a JavaScript developer. Not a hardcore one, at least. I know my JavaScript, I know my jQuery, but I'm not super familiar with React and all the really cool MVCs of today. So I had no idea how to make a browser library like this. I don't know how to maintain state. If you've ever played with who here has played with jQuery? Who here thinks jQuery beyond 20 lines remains maintainable? Yeah, nobody. It's really hard to keep that stuff maintainable. So how do you maintain state? How do you update the UI without going crazy doing it? Right? You don't want to go crazy. So what this talk is about is very simple. We're going to be talking about some JavaScript. I'm going to teach you some JavaScript if you didn't know it already. We're going to be talking about bundling, state management libraries, some UI management libraries, and the occasional cat picture. Whoa. There we go. You can go, that's my cat. I will not use other people's cats in my slides. So let's talk about bundling. So bundling is kind of the stuff where you take all these kind of libraries, these dependencies that you use. If you're writing like back-end JavaScript, you can just use those, but when you want to write front-end JavaScript, you kind of need to combine those all into one file that you can give to a customer. Now there's a couple of solutions for that. There's Browserify, which beside one of the worst names for a package bundler, is also quite old. There's Webpack, which is a lot newer and very popular, but the one I actually fell in love with is called Rollup. Now, why did I like Rollup? It's very simple. They call it the next generation JavaScript module bundler. It allows you to write really nice ES6, so next generation JavaScript, or actually more like current generation JavaScript, because it's here, you can use it. It bundles everything into one file, and it's smaller than Webpack and Browserify. It's much smaller than Browserify, and it's also, by my estimate, smaller than Webpack. And it allows you to export to AMD, CommonJS, etc., globals, UMD. What does that mean? That's very simple. It allows me to do the stuff that I showed you before, where I can go punch.setup or braintree.setup and just say, hey, use this global namespace and initialize this library. But the really cool thing that it does is it allows you to do tree shaking. So tree shaking is very interesting. Let's say you have a module, right, that you want to include in your library. And it's called a module, and it has two classes that it kind of exports. It has an awesome source class, which is 100 lines. And then it has for the enterprise people, any enterprise people here? It's got a very special 2,000 lines, bits of code for you as well. And by default, it exports the awesome source one. So when you include it, you go, hey, import awesome source from awesome source. And then you use the source to make some new sauce and make some great recipes. Now the problem is this will import, when you start bundling this will import 2,100 lines of code, because it will start importing the enterprise one as well, which you're not even using. So tree shaking is where this is a different example. Let's say we do this. We have a main.js and a math.js. And in math.js, we have two functions, a square and a cube, but we're really only using cube. If I tell Rollup to start bundling this together, what that does is it just gets rid of the square one completely. It just combines it into just the lines of code you're exactly using. And that's really cool, and that makes for really, really tiny libraries. And like I said, it allows you to do stuff like making UMD files, which gets you ugly code like this, but really it's just those first few lines that allows you to do stuff like this. Okay, so we've got liftoff, right? We're getting there. I know how to make a browser library that I can use to ship to people that actually should be kind of tiny. Now, the real elephant in the room, though, is UI management. There's plenty of libraries out there for kind of doing really cool UI stuff. There's nothing that can be said to be certain except for DevTalks and JavaScript frameworks, right? There are so many different JavaScript frameworks out there for doing stuff. There's Angular. Angular is about 50 KB compressed. But the really hot one at the moment is React.js, which is compressed about 146 KB. Riot.js, which I kind of fell in love with, is a bit like React, but only 9.18 KB. That's amazing. That's really tiny. That allows me to do really cool stuff in a really tiny file size. So like I said, it's a lot like React, so it allows you to do stuff like custom tags, virtual DOM, it has an enjoyable syntax that doesn't make you go crazy. It doesn't support IE8, but who here still has to support IE8? I'm sorry, I feel really sorry. And like I said, it's really tiny. So what does it do? It allows you to do stuff like this, like you can say, hey, I want an element. It says import a tag. import Riot, and then just mount that tag to that element. And a tag would look something like this. You just put it in your own namespace, and you say, put a header in it, and then basically it will insert that header into that element that you've just bounded to. That's really cool. Oh, and the cool thing is you can do stuff like nesting them inside of each other. So you can nest tags inside of tags and then reuse them, etc. Which is really cool and allows you to do a lot of really powerful stuff. Who here is familiar with React? Cool. That looks familiar, right? That doesn't look completely crazy. Cool. So I'm starting to see the end of the tunnel here. The only thing that I need to do is like update the state. So update the UI as the user kind of clicks through. Now, there's two hard things in computer science, cache invalidation and naming things. But let's add to that state management. Oh wait, that's supposed to be 3 hard things. Oh, now I forgot. Oh wait, this is hard. This is really hard to update the state and not go crazy. Let's look at a picture of a cat, just because we can. Luckily, like, coming out of React, there's one thing that was really cool that came out of React, which is called Redux. Redux is exactly there to allow you to maintain and update state. I could show you a whole bunch of other libraries, but I don't need to. Why not? Because Redux is 2 kilobytes, including all its dependencies, before it's compressed. So I think it's probably tiny enough for everybody. Probably. And like I said, you know, I can use it together with Riot. So the way that looks, if we look at a tag like that again, here I have a kind of a counter. So I've made a counter, it updates the state. And I can just subscribe to the Redux and subscribe to every time the state changes. It just binds the state to that tag and then use that state in the tag to kind of render numbers, render show and hide fields, etc. And I can write really simple little reducer functions like this one where I just take a state coming in, take an action coming in, and then adjust the state as I go. So I can have an increment and a decrement and just increment and decrement the counter. So that would look something like this. I could just say on click, increment, and it will just dispatch to the Redux function, the reducer that I wrote. It just dispatches that event. So I'm not like doing crazy stuff in my UI. I'm not going like, oh, you know, if this changes, then update exactly that field. I don't need to do that. It's all reactive. It's all very easy to write and maintain a state and not go crazy. So what does that look like in real life? Let me try and show you a demo. Now this is going to either completely fall apart because I need to drag some stuff to the other screen. There we go. Can you see that? Yeah, that's pretty visible. So in this case, I've made a little counter. I can say build.js. I include that. I have a container, and I say, hey, counter set up on that container. My counter looks something like this. I have 2 buttons, one increments, one decrements, and they just dispatch that action type. And here I'm just showing the actual counter, and then in my index, this is like the only kind of like longish file where I have my reducer function that kind of does the increment and decrement, and a bit of setup to actually tie everything together. And if I start that, if I just start it over here, then, sorry, it'll just take a second to load. There we go. We have a simple like up and down counter. It's like the most fabulous UI you've seen, right? This is like really impressive, right? But as you can see, like, oh, sorry, that one. Whoa, where's my view page source? I'd show you the source, but it's not giving me that option. Okay, I don't know what's going on. But it's really just 4 lines of code, and none of this actually exists on the page before we load it. So that's it for the demo. Let's go back to the, I lost my cursor. There we go. Pretty simple, just a few lines of code, and you can just integrate that now into anybody's site. So anybody who wants a counter on their site, I have the code for that. Now, to prove to you that this is small, this sample is about 12K. Now, a lot of that is just the bare dependencies. I have a link at the end of my slides which shows you to the source code. I also built the same sample using Webpack, 13K. So Webpack is pretty good, but it's still less efficient than Rollup. Now, of course, that's hardly scientific. There's somebody else who's done a lot more research about that. They've kind of taken some more representative samples. They combined stuff like Babel, Browserify, and Uglify. They came to about 3.9K. Webpack 3.6. As you can see, Browserify is pretty inefficient. Rollup gets smaller. The only ways to kind of get smaller than with Rollup is to go with stuff like TypeScript and Webpack or Clojure. If you write Clojure, it gets really tiny. But like if you think about it, the pure JavaScript solution, Rollup is still in that list, the best representative sample. You can find more of that there. My results for Punch, I started with a source. It was about 37K, but that's just my source. That's what I've written. Next to that, once I bundle that, including all the files, I come to about 180. I uglify it, I gzip it, and it's below 20K. So I was pretty happy with that, right? That's pretty damn cool. So to wrap things up, I really like ES6. ES6 classes and kind of importing and tree shaking is really cool. Riot.js is really tiny and allows you to write kind of reactive UIs without importing the entirety of React. It's really small, like really, really, really small. Redux should be small enough for everybody. And Rollup still kicks Webpacks. I'll leave that for you to fill in that word. Some final notes, though. Rollup and Riot at the moment, my source maps are broken. I need to figure out what's going on there. So for those of you not familiar, that basically allows me to translate my errors to my original code, not just to the lines of bundled code, which is really hard to debug. There's some other really cool stuff like Webpack chunks. Webpack allows you to kind of chunk up your file and load the files from the server as the user actually needs them, which means you can ship a really tiny bit of your code base and then load the rest as the user actually gets to it. Meaning that on a mobile device, if the user never goes to those pages or those elements, they will never need to load that, and they get to see that initial UI a lot faster. A lot of this is hardly scientific, you know, but you know, screw it, science, right? We got to do this. We don't get anywhere if we don't kind of experiment with these kind of things. So that's me. The slides are there. The demo is there. I'd love to hear your ideas. I'd love to hear your thoughts on writing tiny bits of JavaScript. And feel free to ask me any questions. Thank you. Any questions? None of them. Okay, cool.